Hello and welcome. It's David and Brent joining you again this week. Today is February the 12th, so it's a short month, so we're moving through this one pretty quickly. Um, and just want to chat with you about some things that we've been writing about, we've been thinking about. And Brent, I want to kick this one off on fertilizer prices. We have a new article up looking at fertilizer prices and sort of an interesting split screen in the headlines. One of them will be prices up double-digit percentage from the fall. So nitrogen up, depending on the product at the USDA data, 10 plus percent. I think it was DAP was up, 30% from its lows. But I think that's the other side of the screen, which we're coming off very historic lows. And so in this fall, the prices for like a 180, 60, 60 hypothetical blend, we're at 10 plus year lows. And so we've seen a big increase off those lows, but it's still among some of the lowest in history. So we're around $105 an acre for that fertilizer blend compared to 160 or 140 plus for several years during the earlier 2012, 13, 14. So I think there's a theme that we're going to see for 2021, Brent, is things are things maybe are moving upwards on the input side, but they're coming off low costs. So the big story for the farm economy is, revenue is up quite a bit back to 2014 levels on corn prices, but we haven't seen, say, fertilizer prices get anywhere near 2014 levels.
Right. So, I think there could be a lot of different things driving this, but one has to note that there's probably a pretty strong demand. People are anticipating some pretty strong demand for nitrogen, given the corn, where people are talking about corn acres going this year. So that's part of it. And I know you all also talk a little bit about, the relationship between oil prices and fertilizer prices, and oil prices all of a sudden have kind of taken off too. So, but again, not anywhere near where they were the last time fertilizer prices really got high.
Right. So go back to 2014, that era, we had similar prices for corn, but fertilizer prices and nitrogen prices are considerably lower. What's the difference? Well, crude oil is 40 some dollars a barrel today, which is a huge increase from 16 back in the spring. I guess negative for a little bit, right? But the monthly average was 14 or 15. Back in 2014, that crude would have been $90 to $100 a barrel. So that's a huge part of this difference. So prices are pretty, that model that we've replicated from Kansas State, which is really powerful. It's kind of tracking spot on with what you would expect. So it's built in these strong prices for corn, but low prices for energy and crude oil. And so looking ahead, we got to keep an eye on both of those. It's the combination that leads to high fertilizer prices, right? Strong corn prices and strong energy prices.
Yeah, and any of those ratios you look at, it's still, like you said, the headline that we're seeing now is that prices are up. But the context is that they're still relatively low in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, yeah, and so that's really challenging for these narratives that we might be hearing about, right? Is they're coming off lows, and so it's a big increase, but it's coming off of lows. Speaking of headlines and deviations from lows or extremes, also updated our question on trade with China. Of course, for the last since December of 2019, we had the question posed before phase one: what's the probability of China buying more than 35 billion of ag and ag related products? This wasn't, we had all, we in no way, shape, or form were trying to, I guess, grade China's achievements on the phase one targets. I think there's a lot of people out there doing that. And that's sort of an interesting, complicated process. We just want to say, will China buy a record amount of ag products? And, I'll let you go read the article, but I had to get really creative to find any sort of record-breaking measure. China's ag purchases on a dollar basis weren't a record. They're for the calendar year 2020. They weren't a record on dollar basis for soybeans or on a bushel basis for soybeans, you can say that fourth quarter activity was the strongest fourth quarter activity on a bushel basis, but for soybeans. But at the end of the day, China's back as a big buyer, but we haven't seen this huge, robust, record-breaking level. I think that's sort of a reality that we've got to sort of frame it up. I was surprised by the data. I thought we were going to see some records. I guess I knew we didn't get to the 35 billion, but I thought we were going to see some really strong purchases. But the purchases kind of came late in the year. But this demand story might not be as comprehensive or robust as maybe I was initially thinking. Maybe some of you listeners as well.
Yeah, and David, you always teach me to write the alternate headlines, and I think the soybean purchases one, the annual one, is a good example of what you could do there. I mean, one headline might say, Chinese soybean purchases rebound to just short of 2016's record high. So implying that, telling you that, look, we're not even back to where we were at in 2016 on soybean purchases. Or you could say Chinese soybean purchases triple from 2018 levels.
Yeah.
So, I think that soybean deal is something people, the trade war, it just had a huge impact that I think we're still trying to kind of recover from. I mean, our soybean sales to China in 2018 were 300 million bushels. This year they'll go over 1.2 billion. It's really kind of mind-blowing how big of a wrench that threw in things. And so that's part of what you're seeing is just the rebound to kind of what was normal activity.
It's I guess I was surprised because I'm like everyone listening, right? I see all these headlines, I read these Twitter feeds, and I thought it was going to be a big number. And I guess I thought I was already sort of protecting my thinking, realizing that we went from 1.2 billion bushels to 300. Like we wrote all these articles, but even I was surprised how it was just kind of back to the status quo of the pre-trade war. And in fact, it's kind of disappointing because we should have expected a little bit of growth off the pre-trade war levels. And maybe we'll get back to that, but the long run story for China is bullish and it's big. And Brent, a year ago, you wrote an article saying the $40 billion question. Everyone was saying China's going to buy $40 billion worth of ag products. And there's some debate as to what that was really counting. But the idea here is we're not setting any sort of records. We're not seeing any sort of, growth off pre-trade war levels. We're just sort of got back to the status quo. Now,
that's good news, though.
That's a good news, right? But I guess also don't let the good news turn into something bigger than what it is, right? I guess that's the other way you can disappoint yourself is take a positive story and blow it up to more than what it really is. And so let's just sort of root that and think about that. And that leads us to the third article, Brent, is confirmation bias. I'll let you chat a little bit about this because I guess there's a little confirmation bias here that maybe I felt too when I was writing these articles.
Yeah, so we have a new article up on, just kind of explain a little bit about what confirmation bias is and how to kind of defend against it. And there's some really good links in that story that you want to think. But confirmation bias is just that idea that we tend to seek out and believe opinions that confirm our thinking. So we have a assumption or we have a view of the world, and we tend to find other people's who also have that view, and then that reinforces our thinking on it. We become even more confident in our belief, and it's kind of it's a dangerous bias, that a common decision-making bias, but a pretty dangerous one.
And it's one that we talk a lot about. We finally wrote the article about it, sort of outlining and laying it all out. I always think about the confirmation bias with the weather, right? if you open one, how many weather apps do you have on your phone, right? And it's kind of like, well, you don't see the forecast you like in the first one. You go to a different forecast, and you go to another forecast, and you look for the one that gives you the forecast that you like the most, like, or fits the, maybe you want it dry so you can plant, or you want it wet so you don't have to turn your irrigator on. So yeah, that's when I always get myself. When I find myself looking through multiple weather apps, I'm like, yep, I'm on an expedition to confirm a bias.
Yeah,
So,
I'm terrible at that. And it's so bad that I know which apps use the same model because you can tell, they're all of them are based off of to some extent, based off of, from what I can tell, the National Weather Service, right? And I'm like, oh, I'll bet you this one's using the European model. It's probably going to look better, So it's kind of funny that you would say that.
So Brent, one last thing I wanted, we're always about challenging our thinking and challenging ourselves. So Brent, there's something, outside of our normal conversation that you're involved with. And every year, I thought we'd talk about it because every year you mention it to me at the same time of the year because it's sort of an annual recap. So I thought maybe you'd want to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so a few years ago, the University of Nebraska started this program called TAPS, which is, I can't remember what it was, Testing Ag Performance
Solutions.
Solutions, right? But what it really is a contest where the university has a farm, or basically a research farm, and they divide it up into little plots, and each contestant or group of contestants gets a plot, and you can tell them how much nitrogen you want to put on the corn, how much fertilizer, how often you want it watered, what variety of corn to plant, a variety of decisions, and then of course marketing. And our group has participated from the start at the urging of a local person here who's pretty forward thinking, and he got us involved in it, and we've done very well in this contest over the years. We won it, the profitability one year. We were second this year, and it's getting bigger and bigger. It's an interesting contest, and so it basically lets you farm these 10 acres and make these decisions, and then they can go through and track and see, oh well, here's the wide range of fertilizer that was applied to all of these fields, and here's what people's marketing strategies were and what they did, and here's all these different things that people can do. So I think it's a pretty cool contest. It's been kind of fun. Our group is big. We have like 10 of us involved in it, and people always ask me how we make our marketing decisions. It's kind of a consensus based. Somebody gets an idea and it's like, well, just do this, and so we basically just text back, yeah, go for it or not. So it's kind of a fun way to kind of get everybody talking and see what they're thinking. But it's pretty innovative program, I think, that they came up with.
So Brent, I'll share a story that I didn't tell you I'd share. I remember a few years ago you were talking about this, and I called you one day. What are you guys? Oh, I'm looking up these nitrogen I'm looking at the nitrogen report for how much nitrogen we should putting on this field of corn, and it was kind of made me laugh, right? Because you farm and you think about this stuff all the time, but this contest made you seek out new information, right? You were seeking information. You were trying to move away from that confirmation bias. You wanted to sort of challenge your thinking a little bit. You weren't just replicating what you did on your farm to sort of, because I guess this is in the eastern part of the state and you farm in the western part of the state. And so this is part of I need to find these reports and challenge my thinking a little bit. So I just think it's interesting. It's a fun way. It's sort of this game that allows you to test ideas and get feedback, and because everyone's in the same field, and so everyone's making these different decisions in this same field, and then you compare all the results, and so you really can't say like, oh no, this was a different, and it's replicated. I think that's the really neat part is there's replications, and so sure, somebody might get lucky, but when you take the replications, it starts to remove that, and so you can't make these sort of weave these narratives that help you confirm your bias, right? You got to kind of take the results and learn a lesson or two.
Yeah, and it's also a good lesson in, you're always talking about understand the rules of the game. And so you really need to understand, if you want to win the contest, you need to understand what the rules are. They've changed them a little bit because, do you buy crop insurance? Well, none of us, there, like I said, about 10 of us that are in this group, and we all buy multiple peril crop insurance. But in this contest, if you really want to win the contest, sometimes you do some more high variance strategies, like not buy crop insurance, and they've changed that now and made you, I think, actually buy some kind of insurance. But it's interesting. It's an interesting concept, and I thought Nebraska is clever that they came up with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's all we have for this week. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we look forward to, send some questions. We got a lot of questions. One of our listeners reached out with a question that Brent and I have been discussing on Bitcoin. So we're going to have to think about that a little bit. So there are lots of topics out there, from tax policy. So send us your questions. We'll be happy to look into those and think through them, and no guarantees, but we'll at least give it a thought. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all next week. Thanks.
Thanks.